Let me explain a few of them. Adultery. What is adultery? Adultery is voluntary sexual relations between a married person and someone other than her lawful spouse or his lawful spouse. Fornication is voluntary relations between two unmarried persons or two persons not married to each other. Uncleanliness is moral, impure or evil and vile or unclean thoughts. Lasciviousness is inclined to lustfulness or wantonness for nasty stuff. Idolatry is the religious worship of idols. Witchcraft is the art or practice of a witch, sorcery, magical influence, or witchery. And hatred, and it goes on and on and on, and it talks about all these different things. I'm not going to go into explaining all that. Partying. We all know what partying is. It's partying in a boisterous way, like getting drunk and going out and getting intoxicated and doing things that you shouldn't be doing. J.B. Phillips doesn't only quote all the nasty stuff, but he quotes the other stuff too in verses 22 through 25. The good stuff. This is what the Spirit should be doing in our flesh. The Spirit, however, produces in human life fruits such as these: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, and fidelity, tolerance, and self-control. And it says, and no law exists against them. In our version, the King James Version says there's no law against them. Or against such there is no law. Sorry. Those who belong to Christ have crucified their old nature with all that it loved and lusted for. If our lives are centered in the Spirit, let us be guided by the Spirit. Now when I, myself, think of the fruit of the Spirit, or when I think of fruit in general, I think of something that is luscious and enjoyable and tasty. And thus the things of God, they are enjoyable. They are good for the soul. They are tasty to the soul. If we allow the fruits of the Spirit to work in our life, we will enjoy the abundance of the Lord. The fruits of the Spirit we find in chapter 5, verses 22 and 23 are this: love. Now, in January, you have an assignment on the fruits of the Spirit. You pick one of them. Love. The world describes love in a profoundly tender, passionate, affectionate for one another. Sir Henry Drummond said, when a beam of light is passed through a crystal prism, now you have to kind of picture this, what a prism is. And it's crystal, and when a beam of light passes through that, it reflects. It breaks up to play into a component of violet, indigo, blue, green, yellow, orange, and red colors of the rainbow. The best way I know how to explain this, have you ever had like a watch on your arm and you're driving along? I've seen this in a car, and all of a sudden you just see like this reflection somewhere, and there's all these different colors, and you go, where's that coming from? Well, because of the glass that's on the watch, if the sun is shining and it hit it, it reflects off it, bounces off it, and gives different colors. And that's what he's talking about, that prism of light that breaks up and it plays all these beautiful, beautiful colors. So he calls 2 Corinthians 13 the spectrum of love. God shows forth his promises through the rainbow in the sky. He shows us his love is as beautiful as the rainbow. God's spectrum of love shines through our hearts. And it brings joy into our lives and to all those who can see it. They can see that reflection of Jesus Christ in us. So our hearts, if our hearts is right and it's pure and it's clean, then God's love can shine through it. It's like that pure glass. It can shine through it. But if it's covered with filth and all these other things that are we talked about in the flesh, if it's smeared with that, then His light can't shine through. It can't reflect God's love. It can't shine forth to other people. And so therefore, we need to let our light shine. We need to show other people who Jesus is through our actions and through the fruits of the Spirit. Another fruit of the Spirit is joy, a state of love or felicity. The world has pleasure and happiness, but joy is something that is deep-seated. People think that joy is just feeling good about something. Oh, I'm happy. Oh, I'm excited. I'm just chuffed, they would say here, about that. But joy is something more than that. It's deep-seated. The joy of the Lord is our strength. It is what helps us make it sometimes through the day when we have nothing else to draw from. You see, these fruits of the Spirit, you can draw from them to give you strength. Just like fruits are good for you in the natural, they're good for you in the spiritual. And it's deep-seated in it. It comes from knowing Jesus in a special way. It comes from self-sacrifice. How do you spell joy? Jesus, others, and yourself last. Joy is in giving. There's a song that says, "There's joy in giving, and I've found it to be true." The more you give to Jesus, the more He'll give to you. And the more that we pour out, the more that comes in. Peace is love in repose. The dictionary defines peace as calm repose. It means freedom from war, quietness of mind, or harmony. Long-suffering, enduring injury, trouble, or provocation, long and patient. That is peace. Peace gives you harmony. Gentleness. The psalmist said, "Thy gentleness has made me great." Goodness. It means excellent virtue. Benevolence, which means to have our disposition to do well, to be good. Faith is confidence or trust in a person or a thing. And faith is believing in something, although it's not necessarily based on proof, on something you see. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, but it's the evidence within ourselves of things not seen. We can't necessarily see all the things that were promised, but we have faith in God that they're going to come to pass. Meekness. Humbly patient or docile. In 1 Peter 3 and verse 4, "But let it be the hidden man of the heart, in that which is not corruptible, even the ornament of a meek and quiet spirit," which is right, which is in the sight of God, a great price. Meekness. God finds meekness beautiful. That meek and quiet spirit. In His sight, it's a great price. Temperance. Temperance is moderation or self-restraint in actions, statements, etc., and self-control. Temperance is not necessarily answering something right away. It's thinking about it. It's taking the time to make sure you give the right answer. It's restraint. It's not reacting really quickly, and it's self-control. D.L. Moody defined the fruits of the Spirit like this. Joy is love exalted. Peace is love in repose. Long-suffering is love enduring. Gentleness is love in society. Goodness is love in action. Faith is love on the battlefield. Meekness is love in school or in learning. And temperance is love in training. I think that explains it well, because it is the love of God that is shed abroad in our hearts. And when His love is shed abroad in our hearts, then it's those fruits that He begins to place in us. And it starts with love. It starts with His love, not our love. But it starts with His love, that agape love, working in our lives, molding our lives, allowing Him to work through us. And that's what Paul was trying to tell the Galatian church. Don't feed on the lower, baser nature of your flesh. Don't allow those things to control you, those emotions to do things that are wrong. But allow the Spirit of God to work in your life. Don't allow the law to dictate to you, but allow the grace of God to work in your life. And therefore we find that the chapter closes by stating that if we live in the Spirit, we shall also walk in the Spirit. There is a saying that says we need to walk the walk and talk the talk. And this is so true. Because actions do speak louder than words. So chapter 5 ends with Paul saying, live in the Spirit and then walk in the Spirit. But don't live after the flesh. And don't walk after the flesh. Chapter 6 tells us some of the things that we need to do or put into action. Chapter 6 verses 1 through 9 gives us things that we need to put into action, such as forgive one another. Be burden bearers. Bear one another's burdens. Paul tells us to walk humbly before God and before man. And he tells us to prove our works. In other words, we should test to see if they're works that God would approve of. And then Paul tells us not only to bear one another's burdens, but to bear our own burdens. Be content. To bear our burdens, to carry what God has put upon us, because He will bring us through it. Whatever God has given us, that we find a burden in our lives, know that not only is it a burden, but He is the one who helps us carry that burden. And He is the one who puts us in the trial, in the fire sometimes, to prove us, to prove who we are. But He's also the one who brings us through it. Paul tells us to communicate good things, to reap what you sow. And then he says that God's word and His promise to us that our rewards will come. We have a promise that if we will live for God and do what's right, that we have a reward. Paul said, if I have hope only in this world, I'm of all men most miserable. But our hope is not in this world. It's not in the things of this world, but it is in faith through Jesus Christ. Paul ends his letter to the Galatians, in which he has sought to separate in this letter law and grace, flesh and spirit. Key words that we will find throughout the epistle of the Galatians is words like faith, grace, liberty, the cross. All this time, Paul was trying to tell them, for by grace are you saved, and that not of yourself. Nothing you can do will save you, but it is the gift of God. I hope you all have a wonderful day. And I hope I've been able to impart to you a little bit of a greater understanding what Paul was trying to say about grace and faith, and about living according to the grace of God. For the just shall live by faith.